Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we've got a spine-chilling compilation of the creepiest stories from around the world. From eerie trucker tales to unsettling encounters in the woods and paranormal experiences that defy explanation, we've got it all. So get comfortable, enjoy the ride, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you love the content. This happened when I was 11 and visiting a lighthouse in Michigan that was supposedly haunted by a boy. My parents wanted to take a tour with the tour guide, but I wanted to play outside considering we had been touring various sites in the Upper Peninsula that day. No one was around, so my parents ended up letting me play outside the lighthouse while they took a quick tour. As I played outside, a really beat-up ball rolled up to my feet. I bent over to pick it up, and as I stood back up, I saw a boy standing next to the edge of the lighthouse looking at me. I assumed the ball was his, so I tossed it over to him and he wandered away. I didn't think much about it, but when my parents were done with the tour, they asked what I did. I told them something along the lines of, I was just wandering around. Oh, and I helped this kid get his ball back. The tour guide was with my parents, and when I mentioned the kid, he looked startled because, as I mentioned earlier, there was no one other than us at the lighthouse. Only 3 cars. My parents' car, the tour guide's car, and the car belonging to the person at the front desk. The tour guide asked me to take a look at a picture in the lighthouse. I know this sounds super cliché, but when he showed me the picture, it was the picture of the exact same boy with the exact same beat-up ball. Apparently that kid died at the lighthouse. On a side note, we checked around and there was no boy. So you might be asking me, why was this creepy, especially considering that the boy never scared me or tried to scare me? What creeps me out is that I touched that ball. When it comes to ghost stories, most people only report ghosts and not other objects, assuming that was a ghost with his ball. What the heck did I touch? Also, it felt solid, like a real ball. If it was a ghost ball, then how the heck do you explain what I touched? This still bothers me to this day. Many years ago, I had a Ford Escort which I really loved. One day I noticed the back right wheel was missing a single lug nut. No biggie, replaced. Soon though, one is missing on the same wheel. I assume the thread is stripped, but the shiny new lug nut is still there. Different ones are missing. This keeps happening, and I assume all the threads are stripped a little bit. I don't want to lose a wheel though, so I get all new studs, go through the pain of driving the old ones out, way harder than I thought it would be, and get all new lug nuts to go with it. Before the week is out, I'm down 1 lug nut. I start checking my car every night and then again in the morning. Yep, disappearing overnight. Not on the ground either. Aha. I have a prankster. Feeling this is annoying, but no big deal. Very small town. I go sell some blood plasma a few times and then buy a big old bag of lug nuts. They keep vanishing and I keep replacing them. But then I notice one vanishes sometime after leaving for work and before I get home. Fallen off while driving? Weird? Coincidence? They're still occasionally vanishing overnight, about once a week, randomly. I start making marks in my owner's manual in the morning before I leave, when I arrive at work, when I leave for work, and when I get home. I check their tension frequently. Occasionally, one is loose. This fits the random falling off but doesn't explain the overnight disappearance. Sometimes it vanishes while I'm driving. Sometimes overnight. At least twice while in the parking lot at work. I'm beginning to feel very weird about it. It just doesn't add up. I keep writing stuff down as if that'll make it make sense. I carve symbols into the lug nut tops with a screwdriver to tell them apart. Heart, spade, diamond, club, and the different ones are definitely disappearing. Not always the same location. I can't explain it. Finally, I try a dangerous experiment. I simply let it run with 3-4 lug nuts. Cautiously at first, I checked the tension on the 3 remaining ones because I imagined the wheel falling off at highway speeds. But over time, nothing happens. I kept the car for almost 2 full years after that, and my back right wheel always just ran with 3 lug nuts. The only time I had one disappear was when I got new tires, and the shop put a new one on. Once it vanished, though, I let things be, and it was always fine. I still have no idea what that was. I don't know how disturbing it was, but it was so odd. I am now curious what would have happened if I had had some kind of surveillance footage of the car at night. I wouldn't say distressing, but it's a big reason I keep my bedroom door shut while sleeping, as well as a big reason I keep the lights on at night. When I was in middle school, I kept my bedroom door open one night. That night my father was out drinking or something. I say something, as he was cheating on my mother at this time, so who's to say? He didn't come back by the time I went to bed, so when I heard the front door slam shut in the middle of the night, I thought, Dad's home. Then I went back to sleep as I heard him walk up the stairs to the living room, the house I lived in for context. You had stairs right as you entered through the front door or garage door, up to the living room and down to the basement. There were then more stairs when you walked up, leading to the bedrooms on the 3rd floor that were over the garage. I never heard him walk up to my parents' bedroom, which was in view from my bedroom door. I felt something was watching me. I woke up slowly to see what I presumed was my father in the doorway. I squinted at him because he plays jokes like this, trying to scare me and my sisters. When I got a good look at the man in the doorway, I couldn't see any features. I went to wipe my eyes and get a better look at him. I stared at the man, and 2 white eyes stared back. I realized this wasn't my father. I didn't scream or jump back in fear. Instead, I did what any sensible person would do: cover my face and hide in my sheets. I heard the man walk over to my bed after I hid. I could feel him still staring at me. He was close enough that I could hear him breathing. I just cried. I was hoping it was all a dream or a prank my dad was playing on me. I eventually cried myself to sleep. I woke up that morning scared out of my mind. I found my father sleeping on the couch. I didn't tell anyone about what happened at the time. I didn't have the best relationship with my father, so I never approached him about it when he woke up. However, I asked my mom when Dad got home, and she didn't know, as he never came to bed. I slept with my door closed from then on. I would sleep on a couch or in a room with no doors from that night onward. I always felt someone was watching me from the corner of the room, but as I got older, it slowly stopped happening. He now seems to come back when I drive at night. Sometimes I think I see him in my back seat or on the sidewalk. So I think whatever this is, it's still attached to me. But I have never seen him as clearly as I saw him that night when he stood in my bedroom doorway. I don't mean to leave it like that, but nothing else has happened. Nor has he shown himself in the past 4 months. So it's good for the time being. So I live in the Midwest, and the shit that goes on around my house is pretty messed up. We never really said it out loud, but no one ever went into the woods behind the house. It was like an unspoken rule. Even inside the house with the window facing the woods, my parents only closed those curtains for that specific window. To the right of my house is a very large field we use to plant corn or soybeans for our farm, and behind our house are miles of woods. Our neighbors live about a 15-minute drive away, so we're separated by a lot of miles. I remember growing up as a kid, and me and my sister and brother would play this game called Ghost in the Graveyard. It's basically hide and seek, but it was in our long driveway and front yard, and you play it at night. I remember one July when I was 9, me and my cousins were playing Ghost in the Graveyard. One older cousin was kind of a jackass and wanted to play in the woods because it was scarier, and with us being kids and I being the youngest, we played in the woods. The whole thing felt so off. I hid behind this massive tree right next to the field. We had flashlights, but you had to turn them off in order to hide. So I was sitting in pitch darkness, and the only thing I could really see was the field next to me. 1 second you could hear crickets, owls, and frogs, and then it went super quiet. About 5 minutes into waiting to be found, it began to smell like literal sewage, like shit and rotten meat were mixed into a blender. So I stood up and looked for my cousin. I turned on my flashlight. I remember gagging as I walked because it smelled so bad. As I walked, there weren't any noises or anything that scared me. I just felt like something was following me. So naturally, 9-year-old me started crying, running, and calling out for help. My cousin found me, and we were yelling for the other kids to come back to the house because we were done playing. No one responded, so we went in the house to grab the adults and tell everyone to come inside. We grabbed my dad, and he came outside and yelled for everyone to come inside. There was no rustling or even a response. So my dad grabbed his flashlight and went out and helped us look. Eventually, all the adults came out to look because we had no idea where the kids were. Everyone started panicking, and my dad pulled out his truck and his deer spotlight to see if we could find them along the trail. We stayed out looking for them for about 5 hours, and finally, we found the first kid. Nothing happened to him, but he would have had to take a car to wander out that far into the woods. It was literally miles. Same with the other kids that we began to find by morning. Each kid had the same story. They heard our voices calling from the farthest side of the woods, opposite to where our house was, and they were trying to get away from the smell. Now on Thanksgiving, we always talk about it, and even thinking about the smell now makes me gag. I had what I felt was a father-child combo in the condo my family and I owned prior to moving to where we are now. Every night was insanity with the kids' toys and footsteps. It wasn't just the automatic or robotic toys playing their jingles either. Balls would bounce around, and things would constantly roll across the floor. The dad was constantly trying to mitigate the situation with regards to where the kid was and which toys the kid was playing with. It was as though the kid just wanted to play with everything and go anywhere, but the dad was always trying to corral the kid into a less noticeable corner of the living room and keep the toys quiet, which was in itself way louder than letting the kid simply do whatever. I know it was a dad or man, because the footsteps were of someone trying their hardest to be as quiet and tread as lightly as possible in work boots. When the shoes would clunk and the floor would creak, it really sounded like someone who weighed 250 Laobes. One night I got out of bed and headed to the living room. I could hear a mad scramble on their part as I went from the bedroom to the living room. Once I was there, I got down on my knees, elbows on the couch, closed my eyes and said, "It's fine. Just let them play. We don't mind sharing." Back in bed and on the brink of falling asleep, I heard a few footsteps and the creak of the couch when someone sat down. The Laugh and Learn puppy came on, another toy played a jingle, and the ball with the shapes inside rolled across the floor. I fell asleep, and after that night, we never heard from them again. I still feel bad that they left, but I also think they were able to move on, which is for the best. I seriously hope to meet them in the afterlife. We have an old abandoned mental institution in my hometown that is low-key and infamous for ghost hunter shows, mostly YouTube-based ones. Growing up there, you just hear so many stories about it, and naturally, us teenagers decided to go out there. It's a big 4-story, if you count the basement, plantation-style building in a field at the end of the road. Creepy trees all down the roadside too. It really does look straight out of a horror movie. The road is pretty long too. There are no lights, so it really builds up that suspense, except we went there multiple times and absolutely nothing happened, obviously, and we'd just walk around and check stuff out, except for the last time I went. I don't know why, but on our 10th-ish visit to the building, every single person in my friend group got a gut-wrenching feeling the second we stepped into the road and stared down it into the darkness. We walked about 100 yards to the first gate, and then I said, "Guys, something just feels off." I felt afraid. I felt like there was a very intense evil waiting at the end of that road. I felt like there was someone watching me from the inky darkness that I couldn't see. Every single one of my friends said they felt the same way. We packed it up and left. A few weeks later, my friends went again, but I refused to go. I'd been there and done that, and the experience I had had last time was unsettling enough for me to call it quits. They went, and they had a ton of very weird shit happen to them, including recording what was almost certainly a squatter running across the floor above them. Nothing too crazy ended up happening, but to this day, I have never felt a presence like that. I was working on a turtle conservation project in Cyprus several years ago. It's a remote beach, out of the way and in the middle of the night. We've got a nest that's hatching, and all the hatchlings are collected into a bucket. They're kept in the center for a year, then released with a much higher chance of survival. Anyway, I've got the full bucket of turtle hatchlings, and they need to get back to the center. It's a 20-minute walk in the pitch black along the beach. There are some other nests looking promising, so the other volunteers stick around as I head off. About halfway along the beach, my head torch dims massively. The batteries are nearly dead. Well, suddenly this beach is much spookier than it was before. Then I hear a noise in the dunes. I look over, and in the dim light of my torch, I see nothing. Then a pair of bright, shining eyes appear at the top of a dune. I can see the silhouette of the dune against the stars, but I can't see the shape of the thing with the eyes. Then they start moving down the dune. They don't move like humans. They are definitely animals of some sort. As they get closer, these bright white eyes start shining more and more, until I can finally see a huge black shape around them. My knees have locked. I couldn't move if I wanted to, and I couldn't outrun the thing anyway. At this point, I accepted that I was about to die. Finally, the monster approaches close enough that I can see it in my tiny bubble of dim glow. It's a dog. That is not a comfort at this point. The thing was a huge black Alsatian but had husky eyes. If it had been a pet dog, it would have been stunning. But it isn't. It's one of the half-starved feral dogs that live wild. The thing is more than half my height and is probably desperate for food. Then I remembered that one of the reasons turtle hatchlings do so badly here is that the dogs dig up a lot of nests. I'm basically carrying a bucket of kibble to this monster. Human brains being what they are, and me being in actual peril of my life for the first time, I decide that if I'm here to do conservation work, there's no way this beast is getting my hatchlings. What you've got to appreciate is the timescale over which this is happening. This enormous beast of a canine is running at me. My circle of light only goes about 2 meters out, so it's fractions of a second. And I shout at the beast. I don't recall what. I don't know if it was even words. I might have barked at it, but by sheer luck, it worked. The thing turned tail and sped back into the dunes. The rest of the walk back to the center took far less than the usual 10 minutes, and the hairs on my neck were prickling the entire time. I was waiting to hear galloping paws and feel teeth around my throat, but I made it back without incident. After that, I always had spare batteries for my torch in my bag, and we walked the beaches together, not alone. So this was during a holiday in the mountains. We had been staying at a place surrounded by big, beautiful red wood trees, and we had decided we'd go to the snow on the second day, me, my wife, and our 2 kids aged 2 and 6. The morning was spent traveling from the house to the car, packing things in the boot, and on one trip I heard a thud-crack type noise, like the sound of someone kicking wood. But I didn't see anyone around, so I continued loading the car. So we're all in the car now, in the driveway, and my wife realizes we forgot the sunscreen. She grabbed the house keys, got out of the car, and ran into the house. While she was gone, I just had a thought. I should move the car back. It's too close to the gate. I should move it back so she can get back in. It makes no sense. She got into and out of the car by herself, so there was enough space. But at the time, I followed the thought and moved the car back. Not very far, less than 5 meters. And then shortly after putting the car into park, I saw the big redwood tree, whose trunk at its base was around 150 centimeters in diameter, taller than a 2-story house, coming crashing in front of me. The trunk landed right in front of the car, and a branch landed on top of the bonnet and shattered the windscreen. I got out of the car and saw the redwood tree had essentially split at ground level. It demolished the neighbor's cast iron fence and cut off power to multiple homes as it fell, and the bulk of the tree trunk landed right at the center of where the car had been, until a few minutes previously parked. We still check the trees whenever we park now, and I'll recognize that thud-crack noise now if I ever hear it again. I was running at a park when I saw this tiny blue truck pass me, and I thought they were watching me in their rearview mirror. I kind of just got the creeps. But then I told myself I watch too many crime TV shows, chill out, etc. I tend to spook myself. About 10 minutes later, I noticed the truck passing me again. The park is circular in shape with a one-way road. This meant that they drove all the way around and came back into the park. Okay, now I was nervous. I slowed down to a jog to give more distance between the trucks and then eventually paused. Then this lady comes from behind me. She's also running. I see her often at the park but have never introduced myself. She greets me, says that she has the creeps from the truck, and asks if we could run together. I agreed with her, and we ran together. We were talking about maybe calling the cops just in case. Up the hill, we noticed a cop on a bike, and we ran to him. He talked with us and took down the plates. He had another cop come and pull the truck over since other people in the park had already reported the truck. So I'm glad someone else in the park reported the truck and said something. I guess the truck had been looping the park several times and slowing down by female runners. I am super grateful that the lady asked to run with me. Who knows what would have happened if either of us were alone or didn't happen to pass each other. The cops helped us to our cars and escorted us out of the park. Anyway, not sure what happened to the truck, dude, but I was glad to be around people and glad to have help. I build gas lines by trade for the union, anything from 1-inch diameter pipe all the way up to 48-inch diameter pipe, and I have lived and worked in almost every state east of Texas. 1 year ago, we were building a station for a liquid natural gas storage facility. The natural gas would flow into a compressor station, liquefy the gas, and then flow through the pipeline and into the storage tanks. These billion cubic foot storage tanks, multiple of them, were truly a sight to behold. My job would be equivalent to that of a crew manager, just with different jargon. This particular day, I had all the welders I could possibly get. The welding foreman pulled guys from other crews just for this one day, because this was kind of a critical project, so everything is going fine. Welders are welding, pipes are getting put in the ground, and operators are where they need to be. I mean, this was a good day. All until it wasn't. One of my operators struck an unmarked gas line, totally not his fault or mine, that fell to the survey crew. As fate would have it, this was a very low pressure line, probably close to 15 psi, so natural gas started spewing everywhere. There was a cloud 20 feet wide in maybe 3 seconds. The sheer magnitude of how unbelievably terrifying this was didn't set in for a few more seconds, until I saw the operator hit the emergency stop on his machine, close the cabin, and start praying. Only then did it hit me. We were right in the middle of a major metropolitan area. If the gas reached any of the welders, any of the heavy machinery while it was running, or anyone smoking a cigarette, it wasn't just going to kill me and my crew. Close to 5 billion cubic feet of liquid natural gas were going to level, probably 10 city blocks. The rest was a blur of alarms cascading around the entirety of the facility, like air raid sirens going off as the actuators detected the pressure drop on the gas line and started closing mainline valves. Everyone was running, but I have to wonder how many of them knew that there was no minimum safe distance for them. I live in Southern California and used to road bike pretty frequently, usually in the late afternoon or evening after school during the week. I got a late start one day, and as I got onto the riverbed trail, the sunset was about 20-30 minutes away. I have lights on my bike, so riding at night isn't usually an issue. I get to the beach at the end of the trail, which is my turning point when I have this sense of dread and déjà vu. I'm heading back, and the sun has set completely, and we're well into the blue hour, close to a complete night. I've done this same ride literally hundreds of times. I know the route and how long each section takes me, like the layout of my home. There are usually 3 different routes I take back, and I decided to go the short route back since it was later than usual, and I had a weird feeling. And as I come to a short crosswalk, I see a group of 3 teenagers. I was about 22 at the time, and they're walking down the trail in the opposite direction I'm traveling. I notice one of them is giving another a piggyback ride. It's not weird for teenagers to do, I suppose, but as I pass, I realize it's a girl who has blood all over her face. I immediately skidded to a stop and turned around. They realized this and started to run away and drop her. I call the police and talk to her. She was in pretty rough shape. They had beaten her up really badly and were taking her to who knows where. The trail had been really empty that day. Had I decided to take a different route or not been late to get out, I had no clue what could have happened to her. I was in my early teens and both my parents worked at night, so I'd often be sent to my grandmother's acreage out in the country after school or on weekends. There was absolutely nothing to do there, unless I wanted to watch TV or play solitaire on her ancient PC. So naturally, I spent a lot of time outside, exploring 10 acres of unmanaged woodland. As long as I was inside in the dark, I wouldn't get into any trouble. So one autumn evening, as I'm heading back to the house a bit later than I should be, I can't see all that well, but I hear something snap out of time with my own footfalls. The light is fading fast, and what light there is directly in my eyes as I whip around to see what made that noise. I can catch a glimpse of something canine, a coyote, my brain said. I was not a big threat to most, but I was a late bloomer and a small kid. I can't bear the sun right in my face, so I continue walking home, taking careful note of the sounds around me and stopping to confront whatever was behind me whenever it sounded like it was coming closer. Eventually, the light fades, and I still haven't gotten a proper look at this thing, but I can see the lights of Grandma's house through the trees. At this point, I'm thoroughly worried because I can barely see my own feet, and I'm still being followed with only a large stick in my hands and no light, because I was a dumb kid who couldn't manage time and thought my grandma's property was safe. I finally break the tree line and am greeted with light, but nothing follows me out. My curiosity is battling my fear, but eventually common sense gets the better of me and persuades me to go inside rather than back closer to the woods. I get inside and get a brief admonition from my grandma before she tells me to take the dogs out before dinner. After not getting a word in edgewise, I take the dogs, a chihuahua and a dachshund, so not really dogs, a fake, into the fenced portion of the yard and wait for a while they explore their domain. This time I do have a light with me, because both are usually reluctant to go back inside and will hide, so sometimes I need to find them. I get tired of standing around outside, and the Duchess is nowhere to be seen. I last saw her going around the house toward the back, toward the woods. At this point, I've forgotten all about my stalker from earlier, and figure that she, the dachshund, is digging yet another hole in an attempt to burrow under the fence. So I go round back to retrieve the dog, and she's just staring through the fence, very tense. She growls as I approach, which sets me off. The Duchess never growls. I sweep my light out back and catch a glimmer as I pass over something, so I go back to it and change the beam to a smaller focus. Standing about 30 yards from the fence are 2 gray wolves, completely motionless. Now, I've raised wolf dogs. I know the difference between wolves and dogs. These are big, huge. These are not dogs. I quickly pick the Duchess up and keep my light shining on the wolves as I back towards the side of the house. As soon as I round the corner, I turn around and book it straight for the door, and I burst in out of breath, and my grandma says I'm white as a sheet. I tell her what I saw, and she calls it bullshit, blaming my overactive imagination and saying I'm a drama queen, which as a young man I found quite offensive. And it doesn't matter anyway because nobody is going outside anymore tonight. In the morning, I pester my mum when she comes to get me, and she believes much the same as my grandma, but homers me by going with me to check the area. Sure enough, in softer patches of soil, we see canid prints. Way too big to be a dog. From then on, I was forbidden from wandering the woods. The Forest Service's official statement is that there are no wolves where I live. But I know better, and am glad I don't have much reason to go out into the country in my adult life. I can still feel the strange mix of emotions from that day. Fear, curiosity, confusion. A strange mix of awe and terror. Just one more time in my life, I was incredibly lucky to survive. When I was a teenager, I went on a hitchhiking trip around Europe. On around day 10, I remember waking up and thinking back on my trip so far and thinking to myself, this is so much fun. We made it so much further than I'd ever imagined, and we have had no problems at all. The rest of the day was filled with some uncomfortable situations, and I seriously felt I had jinxed ourselves. We found ourselves outside of Nottingham, in a pretty fancy and busy rest stop gas station area. We had it in our minds that we wanted to go to Sherwood Forest, where Robin Hood used to roam, knowing fully well that he is more of a legend than a real historic character. The funny thing is that the cars that stopped for us as we were hitchhiking did not know where Sherwood Forest was. It was almost like they had never heard of it. We waited for a few hours and started thinking we might camp at the rest stop, which was busy and probably not very safe. We had a rule that we would stop hitchhiking when it got dark, but on this day, with the allure of Sherwood Forest in our mind, we decided to keep trying even after it was dark. Suddenly, a man in his 30s pulled over in a dark sedan and asked us where we were going. We explained we wanted to go to the Sherwood Forest, and he said, "I have no idea where that is, but I will get you there." We had another rule: never put our backpacks in the car's trunk because we wanted to be able to run away if we had to. The guy popped open the trunk, and in pure desperation, we broke our rule and threw our backpacks in there. I, as the male, jumped in the passenger seat, and my female friend got in the back seat. We exchanged pleasantries for a bit, and then he turns and looks at me and asks, "I don't know where Sherwood Forest is, and it is getting late. Why don't we go back to my place and you two can sleep there? Tomorrow morning I'll figure out where Sherwood Forest is and take you there." I look in the rear mirror and see my friend, with a worried look, slowly shaking her head. I tell the man, "I appreciate it, but we really want to sleep in the Sherwood Forest tonight." And he responds, "No problem at all." He drives in silence, probably for about 5-7 minutes, and then he looks at me and says, "So, you guys have been traveling for a bit, huh? It's probably difficult to eat a proper meal on the road and have a nice shower. If you come home with me, I can make you a really good meal, and you can take a shower and clean up. You can even wash your clothes if you'd like." Both of us started getting a little worried at this point, and I said, "I really appreciate it, but as I said, we have plans to sleep in the forest tonight." He again said there was no problem, and he would get us there. We drive for a few more minutes, and he picks up his cell phone. This was at the time when cell phones had just gotten common, and he says the following to the person on the other end. "Hi babe, I just picked up 2 hitchhikers, 1 male and 1 female. I'm bringing them over in a few minutes." And then he drives into what to us seemed like a very unsafe area of Nottingham, with police cars and ambulances on several street corners. He parks by an apartment block and again asks us if we want to come in and eat. We say we prefer to wait in the car, and he walks inside. We look at each other with a worried look. "What should we do?" my friend asks. "Should we make a run for it? What about our backpack and our passport?" We keep debating for probably 5 minutes what to do. We had a mace that we were prepared to use if it came to it. And then the man comes back, with juice boxes and 2 big map books. It turns out he was the nicest person ever. A volunteer at the local hospital was a Christian and had done volunteer work in several countries. 45 minutes later, we made it to Sherwood Forest. It was pitch dark. He had no idea where the entrance was, and he kind of reluctantly left us on this small road that we assumed led to the Sherwood Forest. We take our backpacks and start walking. Remember, it is pitch dark, probably around midnight, if not later. We can't see much in front of us, and we just follow this road into the forest. We eventually find a patch of grass and say, "Let's pitch our tent here," and we do that. After the tent is up, we immediately decide to go to bed. We strip down to our underwear and get into our sleeping bags. We talk about how crazy the day was, and we almost fall asleep when we hear a car coming. It stops not too far from us, maybe 100 feet away. We lay there, listening as we heard a car door open. Silence for a bit. And then a man screamed, "Oscar, get the fuck back here, Oscar!" And then a loud sound. Was that a gunshot? We asked ourselves. We hear the car starting up again. The lights are beaming right at our tent. He revs the engine a little, and then we see the car driving straight toward our tent. We freak out, open the tent, and run out and straight for the woods. The car turns and stops to look at the freaks who pitched a tent right in a small roundabout in the middle of the road. The freaks are now running into the woods in their underwear. He drove off, and we decided to pitch our tent somewhere else, in the pitch darkness. The next morning, we woke up and opened the tent to see 30 small school children staring at us from inside a building. It turns out this was some kind of summer camp. One of the people working there came out and offered us a cup of tea, and we sat there laughing at the weird day we had. I went for a solo overnight hike down a local river in North Queensland, Australia. There are houses about 50-75 meters away through the bush on each side, but down quite a slope, so I barely know they are there. This was a few years ago on a cool winter night with loads of stars but no moon, so it was still pretty dark, and I remember just having that feeling of being watched while I made my way down. I got set up under a smallish alcove on the slope where I felt protected from all sides, made myself dinner, and just enjoyed the peaceful atmosphere. That was until about 11:45 p.m., when I started to hear random thuds, snapping twigs, and growling. I was a decent distance away from the water and had a good look around for crocs. Not that they tend to sound like these noises, it's just a North QLD thing. But despite having an array of super bright LED torches and a headlamp, I could not see anything. I eventually fell asleep, but only to be awoken to the sound of this weird guttural groaning, along with more thuds and snapping twigs that seemed to be coming from above the slope all around me. I once again got out of my tent, took a light, and tried to find where it was coming from. Every time I seemed to try getting close, it just shifted a large distance away and was so confusing, which just added to the weirdness. Then suddenly it would just stop, and everything would be silent for a while. It definitely had me spooked, but also kind of irritated because it just didn't make sense. And at times it was so loud that I would sit up in my tent thinking I was about to be eaten by whatever this bush monster was lurking in the darkness. For hours, this grunting and groaning went on, and weirdly, there was even a bad smell. I went through phases of fear, anger, and desperation to just sleep and considered just packing up and leaving there and then. Eventually, the sun came up, however, and I decided it was time to just call it a day and head home. I start packing up, keeping an eye out for any signs of what the heck I had heard, but nothing seems to be moving around. Then, I felt my heart drop. Out of the corner of my eye, around 2 meters away from me, this massive hunting dog had just appeared out of nowhere. I have no idea how this thing managed to evade my seeing it sooner. It was so stealthy. I completely froze, realizing that about 25 meters away in the bush behind me, there were 2 more equally large dogs. Realizing the gravity of what could happen in the situation, I yelled, "Get out of it," and motioned with my hand to leave. They all winced and ran back across the river, up the slope, and into the bush, where I presumed the back of someone's house was. At first, I felt a bit silly for being worried, but then I realized it still could have gone bad fast. Those things were massive and I saw 3, but there could have even been more lurking around. I wondered if it was them during the night that I heard. Even though it didn't really sound like a dog, I figured it might have explained the thuds and snapping noises. Anyway, I got myself packed up, and just as I was leaving, I saw it. Above the slope on my side of the river, there was a massive herd of cattle. They even started making some of the noises I was hearing. I had a good laugh at myself for that, and I felt some relief. Heading back to my car, though, meant walking up the river, of which a significant part is river sand. This is fine, but it makes moving more than walking pace virtually impossible. After about an hour of this, I sit down to take a breather and grab a drink. I look forward and see a pair of eyes staring at me through the scrub across the river. The dogs are all crouched down, concealing themselves, but their eyes are locked on me. This is when I really started to feel like I was in danger, so I kept my knife in my hand just in case. These dogs had been following me for the last hour, and God knows how long before that, they continued to follow me just beyond the tree line all the way up until I got back to the road where my car was. A few times I yelled, like earlier, and they would retreat into the bush, but they would soon come back, eyes locked on me, sneaking along. When I saw my car was about a meter or 2 away, I hit the unlock button. The sound must have set them off because then one of them sprinted at me, followed by the others. I threw my bag in the back seat and slammed the back door, which made them stop dead in the sand, now in a more aggressive stance. I wasted no time and jumped in the driver's seat, started my car, and peeled out of there as fast as I could. To this day, I have no idea if those dogs were stalking me the day before, were around my tent during the night, or if all the noise I heard was just the cattle. But I definitely felt like they were going in for the kill when I was heading back to my car. It was easily the creepiest experience, and I've only been back to that area once since, and it was with another person, despite this being a frequent favorite spot of mine prior. It definitely makes me second guess any noise I hear at night out in the bush now. The location was an abandoned municipal jail set up in the foothills of the mountains in a valley town in Utah. A fairly quiet area with a fair bit of history, and thus a lot of locations to explore. We were all college kids, ranging from freshmen to juniors, one of the latter being the type to barge into our apartment at 10 at night to invite us young and impressionable youths to go explore an abandoned prison. So, of course, my roommate and I say yes. When given the opportunity, what 18-year-old hopped up on reruns of X-Files wouldn't want to explore an abandoned jailhouse, especially one that was alleged to be haunted? We were stuffed 5 deep in his Mazda protege within minutes and en route. Upon arrival, we were greeted with a very ill-lit and overgrown fence, which we breached via a decent-sized hole. The frontage of the place was odd, lots of glass and 60s modern design, but clearly untouched for decades, save for graffiti, broken bottles, dumped tires, and the like. The layout was similarly strange, practically built into the side of the foothills, 2 stories, but only the upper was immediately visible. The lower story was half buried into the hillside and half exposed by design, with an exercise yard fenced in at the bottom. We near the front entrance and find that it's chained tight, so we proceed around the side and down a narrow flight of exterior stairs to an entrance without a door. The older of us go first, the rest of us piling up outside the doorway to wait for his signal. After about a minute, we hear the sound of gravel crunching loudly, followed by the sound of our brave leader sprinting full blast. He runs out of the building and up the stairs, leaving the rest of us to follow suit or figure out whatever spooked him the hard way. We, of course, sprint after him. After we reached the fence, he looked at us and said he was about to walk through a doorway when a stick got thrown at him. He never saw who threw it, but it clearly wasn't something that could just happen without somebody doing the throwing, so he turned and ran without a second thought. We weighed our options. We halfway wanted to see what it was that threw the stick. However, we didn't want to get killed by whatever ghoul, hobo, or otherwise had done the throwing. So, of course, we made a slow approach back toward the building, but with hopes of finding a different way in. Not halfway to the building, we hear this freakish, unhuman-sounding moan, literally like whatever was making it was right beside us, but we knew it came from inside the jail. Without a word, we all stood, turned, and ran as fast as humanly possible through the hole in the fence back to the Mazda. Whatever or whoever made that sound was definitely not something we had any desire to see up close. There's this place in the northern Adirondacks called Taho. It's a twice-abandoned ghost town that my mother was fascinated with. We went there seemingly every other month. The houses would degrade more and more, but one would always stay the same. The Roosevelt Cabin. It was maintained because of how important it is to history, and although it was supposed to be, it was never locked. We'd gone in there dozens of times, but the last time was when I decided to stop going to Taho for good. I don't know why, and for those who don't believe in ghosts, this might not sound real, but it felt so strange when I entered, like the feeling you get when you're silent in a room full of people yelling and fighting. Then suddenly a chill went down my spine, and I had a vision, things that aren't rare for me, of myself hanging from a rope on the second story with the ground broken beneath me. Typical horror movie dumbass here, I decided to go up on the second story anyway. I'm not sure what room it was, maybe a bedroom, but the floor felt unstable there. It would creak, shift, and moan like it would give out any second. Then I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. It was a rope, and I couldn't stop myself from running away in terror. My family kept asking me why I never wanted to go back, because they said it was our town, but it isn't, and never should have been. That town belongs to something else, something that didn't want us there. If you ever want to go there, it's near Newcomb in New York. Look it up and be careful. I'm never going back, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't. Despite my belief that it's haunted, the town is beautiful. Just watch out for rattlesnakes on those trails, and unless you have the stomach for hauntings, do not go in the Roosevelt Cabin. 2. Location scouting for a shoot, looking for an old abandoned farmhouse. I lucked out to be with some people on the first incident. We were told of an old farmhouse amongst a grove of trees, so we went to look. After a bit of poking around, I stepped into the linoleum in the kitchen and my foot went straight through, like stepping on a sheet of paper. Half my body went through, but somehow I caught myself with my arms and my one foot still on the firm floor. I called for help, crawled, and pulled myself out. It turns out there was a cistern under the kitchen. All those years of having floorboards covered with linoleum and moist air below had caused the entire wood slats below to rot into basically nothing. I'm somewhat afraid of the dark and closed spaces, and it still gives me a horrifying feeling, imagining if I had been alone and had gone right into that cistern. Imagine the state of the water, bugs, dead animals, and putrid water. I have no idea how deep it was. I sprained my ankle badly, but I considered myself lucky. The second was another location scout for a shoot, but not in abandoned houses. I was invited to a farmhouse on someone's property, their old house, which was mostly empty. I found the place and walked in alone. It had the feel of a 1950s four-story split but was renovated in the 1980s. Everything was fine until I got to the top floor. I was completely overtaken by terror for no logical reason. I'm a fairly smart and rational person. I can't explain this, but I felt I was in the presence of something evil, something that would completely crush me if it could. This sense of doom and dread hit me so hard that I ran down the stairs with my camera and out the door, hopped in my car and drove away fast. I parked at the top of the hill where I could still see the farmhouse. I looked at it, and I wanted to laugh at myself and dismiss it as my mind playing tricks on me. But I couldn't. It felt far too real. I got in my car and drove to the nearest town. I went into a gas station trying to forget the feeling and wondering if everyone could see it on my face somehow. I grabbed some bad food and went back to my car. I climbed in, sat down, and began to weep. I can't explain this. It was likely my mind or subconscious messing with me, but part of me is still convinced I encountered something awful that day. While exploring my grandpa's ranch, he stopped raising dairy cattle and milking them. He had roughly 100 dairy cows, about 16 years ago. He also used to breed and raise good ranch horses. He had 45 horses, and he had about 400 beef cattle, now down to 100. Since then, he has one horse left, a 24-year-old black gelding whom he used to rodeo on. His best friend is in horse form, which is why he hasn't ever sold him. The reason he stopped with the dairy cows and horse business was because the economy dropped so drastically that he had to pick and choose what he could afford to keep doing. Also, he had 2 heart attacks related to his stress levels from running a ranch with just himself and my aunt helping. He still grows and sells hay. I was pretty young, but I remember seeing all his horses out in huge meadows with foals, baby horses, that would run up to you to see you, and all his cattle spread out across the hundreds of acres. I remember the dairy cows and seeing one of them have a calf. I was about 4 years old. Anyway, I was exploring the old dairy section of the ranch. It is very eerie, especially at dawn and dusk. I was out there at dusk and the old light outside the milking barn is still on. It never turns off. I found a calendar on the wall inside the barn, and it was from May 1996. I have never moved since then. There is still grain on the floor, and there is still water in the troughs. I stumbled upon a couple dead cats inside the barn, and a dead cow right outside the barn near where he let the dairy cows out into a meadow every day. Inside the milk barn, there is an upstairs. I don't go up there because you will fall through the floorboards, but I heard footsteps above me and it scared the hell out of me. My great-great-grandpa bought this ranch, and he died on the ranch, along with great-grandpa, and I'm sure my grandpa will too. He is 78 currently. I believe they are still there as spirits doing their routine on the ranch. My family started the ranch probably around 120, 130 years ago. I was exploring an old abandoned TB hospital that was later a hospital for mentally ill youth with some friends. It was located kind of on a hill, in a wooded area removed from the nearby main roads, and we had to slip under a fence to access the property. Everything went pretty well for most of our exploration. There were some eerie remnants of its former life, like empty rooms with lone rocking horses, an old stage or theater, and those weird metal bed things used for embalming, or perhaps just washing patients down. On the 3rd or 4th floor, there was a room labeled morgue in spray paint. One of my buddies and I decided to check it out, and upon entry it looked to be some sort of power control room with big fuses arrayed across a bunch of big control boards. We walked in for a closer look with our flashlights, when suddenly the big steel door slammed shut behind us. The damn thing no longer had a knob or handle on our side, so there was no way for us to get out. We started pounding somewhat anxiously on the door to get our other friends' attention when I started hearing movement and fuses popping out of their sockets and clattering to the ground. Not long after, our friends heard, and were able to get the door open from the other side. That was kind of our cue to wrap things up, since that situation could have been pretty ugly if we didn't have other people in the place to hear us. As for the door, noises, and fuses, in hindsight, I attribute them to natural phenomena. Perhaps the door hinges were warped, and the banging on the door may have made some of the fuses pop out of the boards. Still pretty damn creepy in the moment, though. This happened maybe 4 years ago. Not a building, but a graveyard in an old abandoned coal town called Red Ash. This place is notoriously haunted, and there are multiple stories, sightings of apparitions, and paranormal activity in the area. There are multiple legends about a graveyard of child coal miners, a woman who cries over her grave every night, the spirits of coal miners walking along the train tracks, a witch's shack, and a demonic goat man, among other things. There's legit so many stories about this place, and if you ask anyone in my area, they'll tell you about it. Most people actually avoid this area because of the stories, but mostly because it's on a back road with one-lane bridges and potholes. But not dumb teens, and my friends and I just so happened to have been dumb teens. So one night I was driving around with a couple of friends when we just started talking about the place. Friend A and I had never been there, so friend B insisted we go right then. This place is like a 30-ish minute drive from where we all live, so friend A and I were like, yeah, sure, let's go. So we drive all the way out in this deep neck of the woods in a tiny 2-door Mini Cooper, with the intention of finding all the legends, starting with the graveyard. We never got past the graveyard. We all got out of the car once we found the graveyard and started looking around for any signs of the paranormal. All of us were jumpy as hell because it's like 2 a.m. We keep hearing footsteps in the woods, probably goats, and the only adequate light we had was our phone flashlights. We try to take our time, and I split off from our terrified group huddle to look around. Friend A and B are looking around one side of the graveyard, and I'm making my way to the other. Note, the graveyard is very small. We were maybe 20 feet from each other when we were roaming around. It was mostly us saying stuff like, "Found anything yet? Just this baby snake. Ew, no, keep that over there." But then I noticed this set of 2 twin headstones that are very old, and the writing on them is weathered, but otherwise they are still standing. They were particularly interesting because they were twin stones, probably a couple. They were about 1 foot wide and 3 feet tall, both on one base, so these stones were close to 4 feet in height. Most of the stones were in-ground or very small headstones. As I said before, mostly the stones of children or the poor. I circled the base of the headstones, starting at the front. I come back around and begin to walk away when the left stone literally breaks in half and falls toward me. It hits the ground with a loud thump, which is what alerted me to the stone having fallen. It was a horizontal break, but these stones had no cracks, and I didn't touch the stones in the slightest. I jump, turn, and scream at the same time. Both A and B scream. O whips around to see what's going on, while B just guns it straight to the car. I also began running, grabbing friend A so B wouldn't decide to drive off without us. Friend B dives headfirst into the back seat from the passenger side. Friend A jumps into the driver's side, and I throw the front seat backwards and hop in while B's legs are still hanging out the door, now trapped between the seat and the door frame. We drive off with the passenger door still open, and I'm holding it as closed as it will go with B's legs still hanging out. As we're driving, I pull my seat up so B can actually get into the car. I'm actually laughing my ass off now that I'm thinking about this again. We're all traumatized, shook even. But now we're filled with questions and gushing with adrenaline, so we do the stupid thing of turning around and going back to the graveyard to find that the top half of the stone is completely missing now. There were maybe 10 minutes between us leaving and coming back, and in that time, The piece of the tombstone that broke off had completely disappeared. We decide we've had enough and leave for the night. We've gone back a few times after that, and it's always spooky, but we've never had quite the same encounter as our first visit. I actually plan to buy some cheap ghost hunting equipment and have those friends go back out with me because this place is a goldmine of spooks. Trucker here. I think the best creepy thing that ever happened to me was that I was heading from Tucson, AZ, up into Salt Lake City, UT. Well, this was a few years ago, and the main highway, which had been taken out in a flash flood, was under construction, so I had to take a major detour through the mountains in lower Utah. Well, it was getting late, and I was getting tired, so I pulled off the shoulder and went to sleep in my bunk. Now this was in the middle of nowhere. The closest town was like 40 miles away, so it was completely pitch black outside once I turned the lights off. Anyway, around 4 a.m., I wake up because I'm hearing something messing with my truck, like playing with the air and power cables between my cab and the trailer, which is literally 6 inches from where my head is, but on the outside of the cab. Then I feel something climb onto the landing that's on the back of my truck, and it shakes my whole truck. So I'm guessing something around 200 to 300 pounds was climbing around back there. I'm thinking like a mountain lion or a bear. At this point, I'm wide awake, and I want to get this thing away from me. So I slam my hand into my cab wall, trying to scare whatever is out there, hard enough to really make it loud. I then hear someone, a male, scream bloody murder, and I hear them fall off the back of my truck. I then hear about 15 other people all around my truck yelling. I climb up front, turn on my lights, and illuminate a squad of Army reserves doing their midnight ruck march and capture drills. It turns out these guys were supposed to go find an abandoned truck and secure it for their midnight drills. That truck was 3 miles back down the road. They were not expecting me to be sleeping there and thought I was part of the drill. I'm ex-military, so after explaining that I was not part of their test and that legit was just there out of coincidence, we laughed it off. They had to radio to their CO and tell him I was there and not have the other squads bother me. I used to work as a road train driver in the Gascoyne region of outback Western Australia. On the night shift, I would see all kinds of things appear in the shadows because of fatigue, or 3 goats would change into some sort of beast. One time I swear I nearly ran over a corgi, which would be astronomical odds. There is one in the wild in this part of the outback. One night I pulled up to sleep, let the engine run cold for 10 minutes, and then tried to sleep. I woke up to noises, not voices, but some sort of order to the noises, and the whole cab of the truck was shaking. I looked in the mirror and saw shadows around the vehicle. I turned the truck on and saw every single light attached to the thing, and I hastily continued my run to the port. This is a big cab. It would have taken a lot to move it. I rationalize it as being windy, some goats around the truck, and fatigue. Either way scared the fuck out of me, and I never slept on the night shift again. I used to deliver hotshot freight across the Great Plains, Minnesota area. One night around 2 a.m., I was hauling across North Dakota, trying to reach Montana by morning. I was delivering a particularly valuable tractor part that a farm desperately needed for the following day. I began to notice some highway hypnosis sneaking up on me, but it didn't really bother me because I'd been through it hundreds of times before. Anyone who has driven across North Dakota knows that it is incredibly flat. Like really flat. There also tend to be very straight and long roads. It's somewhat easy to see things on the road that are far away, even at night. I noticed something long on the road, spanning my entire lane, approximately half a mile in front of me. I slowed down a little and prepared to move into the opposite lane, thinking it was some retread off a blown tire. As I got closer, I noticed it was 2 people laying head to toe across the entire lane. I swerved into the other lane, successfully avoiding them, and came to an almost complete stop. But they didn't move, not an inch. I was just about to back up and check on them when I remembered a story that an old graybeard colleague of mine told me. He told me that in certain remote areas, people will lie down in the middle of the road and wait for a car or truck to stop and see what's going on. At that point, the road layers, along with whoever else is hiding in the nearby bushes, will beat the shit out of the driver and steal his vehicle, leaving him in the middle of nowhere. I decided not to back up, and when the two people on the road saw me put my truck back in gear and drive away, they both got up and walked toward the shoulder. I called the police and explained what happened, but we were so far away from civilization that I doubt anything came of it. Thanks to that old graybeard, I got to keep my truck, my job, and my teeth. I parked off an exit ramp at about 3 a.m. for my 10 hours. The moon was full and high, and I spotted an unmistakably human figure in a nearby cut cornfield. It was a little spooky, but I just wrote it off as an old-timer putting up a scarecrow for the grandkids. I started watching a few YouTube videos before turning in and out of the corner of my vision. I thought I saw movement. I shut my lights off to get a good look. I saw the figure, but nothing else. I couldn't be sure, but it looked like maybe it was in a different spot, maybe a little closer even. I was definitely feeling a bit spooked. The highway was devoid of anyone besides a car passing every 10 minutes or so. I didn't want to, but I had to jump out to pee. I considered a bottle, but I told myself I was being childish. I took a look at the figure, and it was right where I figured it should be. I hop out, walk between my truck and trailer, and start leaking. Every fiber of my being wanted to look. I told myself again that I was being foolish, but I couldn't help it. I looked out. The field was empty, and the figure wasn't there. My stomach dropped. I pinched off, and I jumped back in. I took off down the highway and didn't give one shit about a violation. I stopped 40 minutes up the road at a well-lit and very full Love's. I haven't stopped on a ramp since. I'm not sure if this story is creepy, but it's definitely scary. My father was a truck driver in East Africa in the 80s and early 90s. During the years leading up to the Rwandan genocide, my father was passing through Rwanda. He reached a checkpoint and was forcibly removed from his truck at gunpoint. Apparently, he looked like he belonged to the Tutsi tribe, and they put him in a cage with other Tutsi prisoners. He tried communicating that he wasn't Rwandan, but no one spoke the same language as him. Every night they would take about 5 people from the cage and slaughter them in front of him. After the 3rd night, he saw a man that spoke a little bit of Swahili, which my dad spoke, and told him that he's not Rwandan and showed him his ID. Somehow that guy got him out, and he was handed the keys to his truck and was on his way. I was driving through eastern Washington on some state roads. There were no rest stops or cities, but I had done the route enough to know there were these massive dirt areas every 40 miles where you could park safely away from the road. I decided to call it a night, closed my blinds, and laid down to watch something on my phone. After roughly an hour, I hear someone try to open the driver's side door. I haven't heard any vehicles on the road the whole time I'm parked, but I get up to peek out the curtains. As I'm looking out into the blackness of the driver's side window, I hear them try the passenger's side door. I peek down from the top of the curtain but can't see anything, so I start the truck and kick on the lights. I'm fairly freaked out at this point, so I'm still not opening the curtains but peeking through gaps. Nothing. Nobody is standing near either of my doors or parked within sightline. I take a deep breath and close the sleeper curtains too, because for some reason that's going to make things better, right? After laying back down and convincing myself that something blew against the truck and it only sounded like the doors, it was fairly windy outside and a lot of flat ground, I hear what sounds like someone trying to pry open the vents on the sleeper. The door handles start clicking again, and the truck starts shifting like someone is climbing on it. I hit the little alarm button in the sleeper, hoping to spook them off, but it does nothing but add to the noise of door handles, fingers tapping on windows and chassis, and the hiss of air coming out of the suspension. Then suddenly, it stops. There are a few moments where I can only hear myself breathing and my heart pounding before I hear another truck approach and then drive by. I spent the next few hours waiting for whatever it was to come back, but it never did. In the morning, I couldn't find any footprints or damage to my truck, but on every window were tiny human-looking handprints, like a toddler had licked their hand and stuck it to my window over and over. My dad drove a truck between Edinburgh and London and tells this story often. He was driving down the motorway and looking to his right, saw a woman with a Miss Trunchbull bun, as he describes it, staring at him with a terrified expression from a car next to him. Before he really knows how to react, the car pulls off at the next exit, and my dad, although shaken, carries on. About half an hour later, a different car with a different driver pulls alongside my dad, with the same woman in the passenger seat and the same expression on her face. My dad thinks fuck this and plans to pull into the next service to report, as even if it's nothing or a misunderstanding, better to be safe than sorry, right? Anyway, the car disappears before he can get any details, plates, etc., and he thinks there is no point calling the police with no details, so he carries on driving. Literally about 4 hours later, almost in London, yet another car pulls alongside him with the same woman, same Miss Trunchbull hair, same terrified expression, except this time she appears to be screaming at my dad through the window, so my dad pulls over into a lay-by and calls the police. Apparently, they have received 3 other calls about the same woman or car in the same area in the last few minutes. It is unfortunately anticlimactic, as he never heard anything more about it. But he didn't see her again, and although he kept an eye on the news, he didn't see anything about it. Hopefully, it's just a giant coincidence. Who knows? Well, it was creepy at first. I pull into a Purdue plant, drop my empty trailer at a go park where they allow bobtails to sit, right next to a nice little pond. My pickup was in 12 hours, so I did my PTI and lay down in the bunk. At about 3 a.m., I hear something tapping on my passenger side door. I get up and look out the window, expecting to see someone, maybe a driver asking for a lumper check. But no one is there. I think maybe I'm hearing things. So I go back to lay down. As soon as my head hits the pillow, I hear the tapping again, except this time it's on my driver's side. Same thing as before. I jump up and look out my window, but nothing's there. Double lock my doors just in case and open my side hatches so I can hear what's going on outside. After about 15 minutes, I hear a very light splat, splat, splat going along the driver's side of the truck. I slowly get up, planning to look out my window at the exact moment whoever knocks on my door, and then I hear a thud coming from the roof of the cab. I stop, grab my tire thumper off its hook, and prepare myself for whatever the hell is going on. Then a motherfucking goose falls off the top of the truck and lands on my hood. It stands up, waddles back and forth, and looks at me. As we make eye contact, the tapping at my door starts again. I say fuck it and throw open the driver's side door, and there's another damn goose waddling away with all the speed it can manage, honking like a 5-year-old who just found the horn on his new bike. The pond I parked next to had a ton of them just dicking around. Needless to say, it was hard to sleep that night because every couple minutes the damn geese would peck at my door or land on the cab and waddle around.